Hello and welcome to the garden. I've got some planting out to do today and I'm starting with a sweet corn. So I thought the first thing I'd do is just give you a quick look at how the first batch of corn is doing. So I planted those out in the polytunnel some weeks ago and I think for the most part they're doing fairly well. So this is the hybrid sweet corn Swift, and some of these are really quite robust. This one in particular is a good strong plant. I've got one runty little fella here in the corner, but it's not a problem. So here I've got a block of 4 by 4 and these are going to give us our first crop of corn this year. And here is the second batch of sweet corn plants. Now this is the old open pollinated variety Golden Bantam, and this is quite a tall growing corn. Now these plants have been here for I would say at least a week longer than would be ideal, maybe a week and a half, and I've been holding back from planting these out because I wanted to see how the germination of the third and final batch was going. To be honest, that's not doing so well, so I think I will be planting out more of these than I had anticipated. Germination in here has been pretty good. I've got, I think from 28 cells I've got 4 missing. I think I can fit 4 plants across the width of this bed. This is a 4-foot bed, so I will put maybe 20, possibly actually all 24, but I'll think about that when I lay them out. But yeah, these are looking really good, and they will be very keen to get in the ground now. Oh, here's what I was waiting for. This is Stoll's Evergreen, and I was hoping to get 16 plants of these, and failing that 12 would have been okay, but so far I've only got 4 and they're all looking a little bit sad. So something has been eating this one. There's some holes in these as well, and maybe it's slugs, maybe it's something else. I'm not sure what's caused that damage. I was wondering whether that could explain why I haven't got more plants here, but I don't think so, because I very carefully had a look in 3 of these cells. In one cell, the kernel had only recently germinated. It was just starting to put a very small root down. In the other 2, there was no sign of germination, so it's possible that I've lost some to whatever pest has been chewing these leaves, but I think it's far more likely that I've just got really rubbish germination. And well, that's a little bit of a pity, but I will at least plant out these 4, and it's not ideal. I'd much rather grow them in a proper block. Pollination will be a bit rubbish with just 4 in a row. So this corn is going to go here in what should have been a brassica bed had I not filled the garden with far too many shallots. Now I was planning to put both of those varieties, the Golden Bantam and the Stoll's Evergreen, in here. I should probably mention that you have to be pretty careful when planting more than one variety of sweet corn. Now, sweet corn is a really unusual crop. I think for everything else you're likely to plant in the kitchen garden, it doesn't matter, unless you're seed saving, what does the pollination. So courgettes, pumpkins, peppers, tomatoes, beans, doesn't matter what they get pollinated with, it's not going to affect the bit that we harvest. But that isn't true with sweet corn, because the thing we're eating is actually the seed itself. That means that it can be affected by whatever is pollinating it. So the genetic makeup of those sweet corn kernels is going to come from both parents, and it just happens that the genes that determine the the eating properties, the things we're interested in. So the amount of sugar in the kernels and how quickly or slowly those sugars turn to starch. Those important genes are recessive. So the first big problem is if you happen to have a garden surrounded by farmland where field corn is being grown, if that pollinates your sweet corn, and the pollen is so fine and it's carried on the wind, if that happens to pollinate your sweet corn, you're going to end up with starchy cobs. They're not going to be good at all. And then there are several different types of sweet corn that really shouldn't be mixed. The worst one for cross-pollination is the super sweet corns, such as the Swift that I've got in the polytunnel. That does not want to be cross-pollinated with one of the open pollinated sorts or any other type of corn. Now the two that I've planned for here, they're both open pollinated, so cross-pollination of those is less problematic. But this one, Golden Bantam, is a yellow corn and Stoll's Evergreen is a white corn. Now if they cross-pollinate, this Stoll's Evergreen is likely to come out with a mixture of yellow and white kernels, and it won't be true to type. So ideally I'd want to make sure that these two can't pollinate each other. Now I sowed the Golden Bantam first because I thought it was quicker to mature. It looks like it really is quite a bit quicker than Stoll's Evergreen. That was probably enough to separate the two, but then they're also separated by, I think, at least 2 weeks in terms of sowing date, and that will put the flowering period at least 3 weeks apart, probably more than that. But if it's 3 weeks apart, the chances of them pollinating each other pretty slim. So under those circumstances, it's fine for me to plant them next to each other. Unfortunately, I have very few of the Stoll's Evergreen, so I don't know that there's going to be any cross-pollination problem with it this year. So I'm going to start from that end of the bed, and I'm going to fit in as many as I can, and whatever space is left, that's for the final variety. And if nothing comes of those plants, then I'll put a different crop there altogether. Well, I've just marked out the planting positions with some old little bits of bamboo, and I've got these, well, they're just over a trowel's length apart, and I think this trowel is about 14 inches, so they're 14 to 15 inches apart this way, a little bit closer across the bed, but I think that should be fine. It's always worked fine here with 4 across. I've got 6 rows of this, so that's 24 plants. I think that will leave me with just the one spare, so hopefully that's okay. And there's room at the end of the bed here for 2 more rows if I get 8 plants of Stoll's Evergreen. I'm not entirely sure that I will, but let's hope so. This soil here had a thick layer of horse compost in the winter. You can see there's still some fairly coarse material on the surface, but that's not a problem. Underneath, the soil looks to be in quite pleasant condition. I don't think I really need to do too much with this. There's some weed in that part. This part was covered, but there's some weed there that I will hoe off. And I might just sprinkle over a little fish blood and bone and maybe a handful or 2 of some poultry manure pellets, and that will make sure that these get a really good feed. Well, that's not too bad. I mean, there's a lot of root there, but I think they will establish quite quickly and happily in this spot. I'm going to fern them in reasonably well. And I'll give them a good drop of water in a minute. Unpleasant looking white root. I don't know what that is, but that is undoubtedly a perennial weed. I don't want that in there. I'm setting them just a little bit deeper than they were in the cells, not much. So I'm just giving these a really good watering in. The soil under the weed membrane, well, it wasn't too dry. The plugs themselves were still a little bit damp, so they don't really need a drink as such, but it's always a really good idea to help settle the soil around the root ball by watering them in well. So that's 24 sweet corn plants, and I think I can rely on getting at least one good cob per plant, so I'll get at least 24 cobs from here, and that's going to be great. I never assume I'm going to get the second one. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Sometimes the second cob is just a little bit rubbish. I'm really sorry for the racket here. There's some chump with a drone flying around and it's winding up the seagulls. What can you do? Yeah, where was I? The second cob. I never assume I'm going to get it. Probably on average we get maybe 1.5 per plant. But if I get just one great cob, I'm going to be quite content with these plants. Well, I've got just one little spare plant here. I want to keep this for at least a week and maybe a couple of weeks, just in case something happens to one of the others. It's very unlikely with plants of that size that they would get damaged, but you never know. I've got the spare and it's very little trouble to look after it for a couple of weeks. However, it is not going to keep in good condition in that cell for a couple of weeks, so I need to move that one on into a pot. So I've got a fairly large pot here. That should be plenty for this to grow on in. I always do like to have some spares if I can. I would have had more if the other variety had germinated well already. I would only have planted 16 or 20 rather than 24, but never mind. I'm going to have plenty of corn from those, and I'll give that just a drop of water. So next on my list is to look at these replacement beans. So these are borlottis. My Chevrier beans did not germinate, not a single bean from 30 seeds, so that was very disappointing, but the borlotti did very well, and so I re-sowed these. I planted the beans out recently, but these hadn't germinated at the time. I just want to see whether there's enough root. Well, yes, I think there probably is. Just about enough root to make it sensible to plant these out. This is very light compost mix. Can't take it out of the pot without it falling apart. It's probably not a bad time to do it, actually. So I will get those in place. So here are my climbing beans along the canes here. They're still a little bit small. Only one or two have started to get hold of the canes. I'll keep an eye on these, because if they get much taller and don't start to pick them up on their own, I will tie them in place. But they were quite small when they went out, and the borlotti have started to establish themselves reasonably well, as usual, about a trowel's length. Now I thought I could get another 12 plants in here, but it looks like I can only get another 9, but I mean, that's not a problem. And this will need a really good water too. This ground is fairly dry, at least on the surface. Deep down it's fine, but I'll give this whole bed a really good water once I finish planting. Oh, I think these roots must be coming from the other bean plants. They're certainly getting well established there. So a few weeks ago I set out some melon plants in the cold frames here. I've got 4 frames for the plants, 2 in each, and I had sown 4 varieties. Now 3 of those came up 100% germination. Blenheim Orange did not. From 8 seeds I only got 2 plants, and they only showed up several weeks after the others had already been potted on. So they were really sad and pathetic little plants, and, well, to be honest, they haven't really developed that well either. So I don't know. I wasn't sure whether I would bother planting these or plant one of the spares of the other types, but I think I'll just knock one of these out and just have a little look. Well, I'd say that's not too bad. It's got some nice root there. It's probably, even though it's quite a sad little specimen, it's probably not a bad time to plant this out. So I've got just the 2 like that, so I can't be choosy. This is what I've got. It's either these Blenheim Orange plants as I'd originally planned, or a couple of the spares. Now if I show you one of the old plants, you'll see the difference. If I just lift this frame up, there they are. So this particular variety, I think, is the largest, best established of those I planted out a few weeks ago. But even so, even the smallest one is very much more substantial than these Blenheim Orange plants. But we'll give them a go and see what happens. I was debating whether to pinch these out to encourage side shoots, and, well, I haven't bothered. I only really want a couple of melons per plant, because I want them to develop well. I want full-sized and full-flavoured fruit if I can get them. So I'm not after a large quantity, and they've actually thrown out plenty of side shoots, so I didn't feel there was any need to pinch them out to encourage that. There's plenty of flowers on there, as you can see. They are probably mostly or entirely male flowers at the moment. I can't see any female flowers on a quick inspection, but they will come later in the year. We prepared this fourth frame at the same time as we planted the others out, so it's right ready for planting. I expect the soil is rather dry in here though. I'll have to give this a really good soak. Yeah, it's pretty dry. So I don't want to set these too deep. That's probably fine. They are rather prone to rotting around the stem there. And even though I've planted all of my cucurbits out just a little bit higher than the ground level to try and discourage those stems, we have actually lost one of our cucumbers, and that's a pity. It's the marketmore that I set outdoors. The long green ridge is fine, but for some reason that plant has failed around the base. I first noticed a problem from a few of the upper leaves looking a bit sad and wilted, and I thought initially that it needed water, but when I looked closer, I'm afraid the bottom of the stem was, well, it had gone brown and it was a bit squidgy. So I don't know what had caused that. It was growing very well. It had a young fruit on it, but these things do happen. This entire family is just a little bit prone to that sort of thing. So I certainly don't want to set this too deep. That'll be fine. It's a rather unfortunate characteristic in a plant that needs plenty of water. So this time it's as much to do with rehydrating the soil in the frame as it is to do with watering in the melon. There's no point me just pouring a little bit of water in where the melon is. The dry soil that surrounds it will soon wick that moisture away, so I really need to rehydrate this entire frame. And they don't lose their moisture too quickly because they are covered. Well, my final job is back in the polytunnel. Now, the other week I planted out some supermarket basil. I was cheating a little bit because my own basil was a little bit rubbish, and well, some of these still are rather sad and weedy. I mean, that's not ready to plant out. But some of these are a reasonable size, and I think I could just about plant that out. I can see a little bit of root at the bottom of the pot, so if I just gently knock that out. Yeah, there's a little bit of root there. I mean, it's not a lot, it's not very impressive, but I think it's probably just as well to get these into the ground as soon as possible, because they can start to get their roots down, and the soaker hose will keep them moist here rather than me having to remember to water these by hand. So I'm going to get a few of these, the larger ones, set out here in the polytunnel between the tomato plants. Well, you can see I've got some good sized fruit coming on these plants already, but I appear to have produced a very strangely shaped tomato. Now, I grow lots of the old heritage varieties, and the large fruited sorts, they often produce some sort of rather ugly misshapen fruit, but they taste great, so I don't really care. But this one here appears to have an unusual appendage, and you don't see that very often. And as usual, there's quite a bit of weed here. I'll remove the worst of that before I plant the basil. Right. So you can see that although the surface of the soil is really very dry, underneath there is actually some moisture, and this soaker hose will certainly be keeping the soil moist in the area in which I'm planting the basil. Now I will give these a drop of water because it's going to be a while before this soaker hose comes back on, but after that initial watering it should be absolutely fine just to leave those to get on with it. And once they've grown a little bit more, I will come along and pinch out these tops and allow them to bush out. Well, it's really toasty in the polytunnel today. In fact, it's been a really muggy, sticky sort of day. I thought we were going to get some rain earlier. It really did look like it could rain at any minute, but those clouds have passed on by without dropping anything, which is a pity. The garden could use some rain. It looks like the sun is back out again, so this is going to be an unpleasant, hot, sticky job. But anyway, I'm going to get those basil plants in, and that will be it for today. So that's all for this video. Thanks very much for watching, and bye for now.